Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupah Kadamahdhyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajeevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha kalpadarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Nama om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamin iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyata Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukham karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim yat kripatamaham vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. Hare Krishna devotees. So this morning we will look at chapter 7 again. We are going to do a summary view of chapter 7 and then we'll come to chapter 8. So chapter 7, which is titled Jnana Vijnana Yoga, the difference between knowledge and wisdom. You need both knowledge, which ultimately progresses to wisdom, for you to make progress on the spiritual path, or any one of the yoga paths, really. So in this particular chapter, we discussed that the single word summary for this chapter is the boss. Who's the boss? Krishna is the boss. He is the supreme boss. One of the questions that come repeatedly when I take these classes is, how can you think of Krishna all the time when you have so many duties and responsibilities? Krishna is giving us ways by which we can always think about him. And specifically, we want to go into the very first shloka, that is the essence of Bhakti Yoga. Krishna is essentially saying, see me everywhere and see me in everything. The unseen is proven by the seen. Just by looking at this phenomenal creation and the variety of this creation and the beauty of this creation, we can think of Krishna. How? Because when you see beautiful clouds in the sky, you know that Krishna is behind them. When you see a bright blue sky, a clear sky, you can think of Krishna. When you see the stars in the sky, you can think of Krishna, because all of this has originated from Krishna. Krishna is saying, you simply see me everywhere and in everything because I am the source of all that exists. Krishna says, I am the cause and the essence of everything. The thread that is holding the string of pearls together, that is Krishna. So in chapter 6, Krishna has ended that particular chapter by talking about the superiority of practicing Bhakti Yoga. So here, Krishna is going to prove to us that we really don't have to go through the strenuous process of yam, niyam, asanas, pranayam, pratyahar, dharana. In this particular chapter, Krishna is saying Bhakti Yoga is the easiest thing to do because it requires less effort, but it gives you superior results and it gives you faster results. So in the analogy that we discussed yesterday, how do you get to the top of the building? An intelligent person will avail the use of the elevator that is there. They're not going to struggle going through the staircase, especially if you're in a hurry to get to the top. Are we not in a hurry to get to Krishna? So why should we follow any other path? A strenuous, long, tiring, and perhaps unsuccessful journey to go towards Krishna. So if you're desperate for Krishna, you will just enter the lift. If you're keen to prove to yourself your own prowess, then yes, you will take the staircase and you will take the rope, perhaps. So Krishna is explaining in this chapter, the essence of all yoga is really to go back to Krishna, to be reunited with him. So we can avoid the strenuous path of Jnana Yoga and Dhyana Yoga because Bhakti Yoga is easiest. It is not frustrating as the other two processes can be. So let's dive into Shloka 1. And we are going to show you how the entire Bhakti Yoga process is summarized in this one shloka. So this particular shloka, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Maya Satta Manah Partha Yogam Yunjan Madashrayah Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yata Gnasyasi Tachrunu. Now, to unfold this particular shloka, we have to go in reverse. In the way this is constructed in Sanskrit, the word Tachrunu is coming in the end. Hearing is coming in the end. But when it actually gets translated, hearing comes in the beginning in English. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. So let's unpack the shloka. The word shrunu means to hear. So Bhakti Yoga begins with hearing. Hearing the holy names, hearing the scriptures. Yatha Jnasyasi Samagram. When you begin to hear, you will get complete knowledge of Krishna. The process of hearing leads to acquisition of knowledge. Rinu leads to Yata Jnasyasi Samagram, complete knowledge of Krishna. And as your knowledge of Krishna is developing, it leads to asamshayam. All your doubts that you're carrying within you is destroyed. So hearing leads to gaining knowledge, complete knowledge of the Supreme Lord. And as your knowledge increases about the Supreme Lord through the process of hearing, your doubts are removed. So what happens after your doubts are removed and you're convinced? Madashrayaha. At that time, you take shelter of Krishna. When does one take shelter of somebody else? When you're convinced that that person can protect you. So through the process of hearing, you acquire knowledge of Krishna. And as you keep hearing and as you keep understanding who Krishna is, your doubts get removed. And when your doubts are removed, you're ready to take his shelter. And after taking shelter of Lord Krishna, what do? Yogam yunjan. You practice bhakti yoga. And once you have started practicing bhakti yoga and you progress on the path through sadhana, what happens? Maya sakta manaha. Naturally, your mind becomes very attached to Krishna. And when your mind becomes attached to Krishna, it is no longer difficult to not remember him. So you see how beautifully the acharyas take just one shloka. Just on the surface reading of it, you do fast reading and you're not even paying attention. But when you read and understand word by word how this process flows, from hearing you get knowledge. By knowledge, your doubts are squashed. When your doubts are squashed, you're ready to, your faith increases and therefore you're ready to take shelter of Krishna. After having taken of shelter of Krishna, since you're already convinced, the only thing that is left to do is for you to begin your practice. Your sadhana begins. And when your sadhana has reached a particular stage of perfection, then your mind gets attached to Krishna. And that's it. If your mind gets attached to Krishna, ultimately it is going to lead to love for Krishna. This is how you remember Krishna all the time. What about if you ask me a question? I am hearing, but most of us are not attentive throughout the class. We may hear a few things and then our mind wanders off. Then we may hear a few more things and again your mind has wandered off. Through 1.5 hours of class, most of us are not paying attention for that 90 minutes. Every single minute. Very rarely do we have the capacity to pay attention that much. So even though you are here, logged in on Zoom, it's very difficult to pay attention for a full 90-minute session. So what happens if you're not attentive? Even then, purification is happening. There is a beautiful pastime here of Prahlad Maharaj and Kayadu. When Hiranyakashipu's wife Kayadu is pregnant, the Devatas get perturbed. Along with Indra, they want to kidnap Kayadu and they want to forcefully abort the child because they are fearful if Hiranyakashipu is such a person with such demoniac qualities who has acquired so much power, what will be the position of the son? He could be even worse. So they thought they would abduct Kayadu and forcefully abort the child. At that time, Narada Muni intervenes and says, what you're trying to do is absolutely against Shastra. You should never touch another man's wife. You should never lay your hands on another man's wife. Because wife is always devoted to the husband. So at that time, Narada Muni also tells them, you need not fear for the child in the womb because this child is going to be a Bhagavata. This child is not going to be demoniac. So Kayadu takes shelter in Narada Muni's ashram. And what do sages do? What do rishis do? What do great devotees do? They're always talking about the Lord. They're always thinking about the Lord. Their mind is absorbed in the Lord. So Narada Muni begins to speak the Bhagavatam, or he begins to speak to Kayadu about the science of God. Somewhere along the way, she falls asleep, like some of us do in class. There's one person paying close attention. This is that rare person, that Bhagavata. Prahlad is one of the 12 Bhagavatas. Mahajans. So Prahlad in the womb is listening intently to Narada Muni. So when we say Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, the best example of Smaranam is Prahlad, because he's always thinking about the Lord. And what does he do in school? He's always talking about the Lord. Every opportunity he gets, he's preaching, starting at the age of 5. This is Prahlad's position. So just by hearing about Krishna, we become self-realized. And therefore, it is always easy to remember Krishna and never forget him. As I mentioned, this is the golden rule for all of us. This is also considered to be the father of all rules, which is we should always remember Krishna, and the do not is never forget Krishna. Kirtanam. Who was doing Kirtanam? Vishnu of all, at all the time. Shukadeva Goswami was speaking the Srimad Bhagavatam to Parikshit Maharaj. So that is Kirtanam. Kirtanam includes chanting, it includes preaching or talking about the Lord. Who's doing Shravanam? Parikshit Maharaj is doing Shravanam because he's sitting in the class and listening to Srimad Bhagavatam for 7 days. Without any food, without any sleep. 7 days continuously is listening to the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam. Parikshit Maharaj, Shukadeva Goswami and Prahlad. We already discussed that the first sense that develops for the fetus in the womb is hearing. And the last sense to shut down is also hearing. So Krishna talks about his 2 energies, the material energy and the spiritual energy. And you may ask, Krishna says that the material energy is inferior and the superior energy, the Jivatmas, are superior to material energy. So if we as Jivatmas are superior to material energy, how is it that we come under the control of material energy? Shouldn't we be dominating material energy? Because Prakriti is represented by the 3 gunas. So if Prakriti is the inferior energy of the Lord, how does the superior energy of the Lord, which is the Jivatmas, come under the control of an inferior energy of the Lord? Well, that's by design. We'll discover that design today in chapter 8. We talked about how you can acquire knowledge, the three ways of acquiring knowledge: pratyaksha praman, which is through direct evidence-based learning; anumana praman, you could say experience-based learning; shabda praman, learning through hearing, which is considered to be the most superior. Real knowledge should lead one, the outcome of developing real knowledge is humility. No knowledge is considered complete without knowledge of who Krishna is. Therefore, material knowledge actually results in pride. But knowledge of Krishna should lead to humility, because the more you know about the Supreme Lord, the more you understand his position and your position. Someone asked Prabhupada one day, some journalist asked, why are you always so serious when you preach? You know, Prabhupada was a powerful preacher. Most of the time, he was intense in his preaching. So somebody asked him, why do you do this? Why are you so serious? And at that time, Srila Prabhupada said, actually, devotees of Krishna are very happy. They are joyous, they are blissful. But when a devotee has understood the nature and the greatness of his master, naturally we feel very humbled. We realize how insignificant we are. And when we become comfortable and accept our insignificance, then you're always on the platform of humility, because you realize how great God is and how stupid and insignificant you are. That causes you to be a little somber about the fact that you're nothing. You're absolutely nothing. Your degrees do not matter, your wealth does not matter, your beauty does not matter. Your fame does not matter, because there's nobody like Krishna. So the more you hear about Krishna, it leads you to understand how insignificant you are. But what is fascinating is that the more a devotee becomes humble by practicing bhakti yoga, he can actually control Krishna. Now we are saying Krishna is the Supreme Master and we recognize our insignificance. But when your love for the Lord is so intense, the Lord is willing to come under your control, just as Mother Yashoda ties up Lord Krishna, binds him out of motherly love. So His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj says that Krishna consciousness is not achieved, it is actually awarded. So that's that cat style versus monkey style. So if we just cry out to Krishna desperately, he will pick you up. So, and then Krishna comes to the part about the 4 different types of personalities who accept him and 4 who reject him. So of the 4, we can look at examples. So Artha, Artharthi, Jnani, Jignasu, and then Jnani. The four kinds of people who Krishna considers to be very pious, who are on the path of surrendering to him. So if you are in distress, you call out to Krishna. An example of that from Srimad Bhagavatam is Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruv, at a very young age, gets insulted by his stepmother, Suniti, the wife of the king Uttanapada, when she says that Dhruv cannot sit on his father's lap because he has not originated from her womb. Feeling very much insulted and distressed, Dhruv goes to his mother Suruchi and says, "How's this fair? How can she prevent me from sitting on my own father's lap? How can she make a statement that I should have come from her womb?" And Dhruv is actually, when you're hurt, you also are very angry and you want to lash out. You want to take revenge. So Dhruv decides he wants to prove that he's going to be a greater, he's very young, he's just 6 years old. But at 6, he decides to take a vow. I'm going to get a greater kingdom than my father's father, and my grandfather. The lineage of Dhruv is from Lord Brahma. So he asks his mother, how do I get this? And she says, well, if people want things, they normally go to the forest and meditate and worship the Supreme Lord. So he takes off to the forest. And along the way, he asks all of the various animals, have you seen God? Have you seen God? Have you seen God? Because his mother has told him that great rishis have said you can find God if you go and meditate in the forest. So, so as he's searching, the Lord becomes a little anxious and he sends his representative, Narada Muni, to go find out what's happening here. So Narada Muni comes and he tells Dhruva, you are very young, to have this kind of desire that you want to see God, and from him, you want a great kingdom, you want to ask him for this, that, and the other. So Narada Muni encourages him to go back to his father. He's too young to tread this path. But Dhruv, being very much convinced that he cannot go back to his father without having succeeded, he tells Narada Muni very politely, if you're not going to help me, please keep moving along. So Narada Muni, being very impressed with the determination of Dhruva, he gives him a mantra. And he says, you meditate on this mantra and you will see Lord Vishnu. So that's what Dhruva does. He meditates for, I think, 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. And as he's closing his eyes and meditating, he sees a vision of Lord Narayana in his mind. And this Narayana form is so beautiful, so attractive. His entire being is filled with bliss. Momentarily, he opens his eyes. And when he opens his eyes, what does he see? Lord Narayana standing in front of him. And Lord Narayana leans over, touches his head. And at that time, Dhruva composes a great poetry. It's there in Srimad Bhagavatam. One such statement that Dhruva Maharaj makes is, I'm such a fool. I was praying for a kingdom and, I wanted to lord it over everybody. I wanted to prove to everybody how great I am. But I was so foolish that I was praying and chasing very attractive, shiny objects that are in reality broken pieces of glass. You are actually that precious gem. I didn't know until I saw you that you are all that I want. I don't want anything else. So the Lord, being very pleased, blesses him. And of course, Dhruva gets a special position in the sky, the North Pole, or the North Star, sorry. So he gets a special place in this universe because of his devotion and dedication. So Dhruva calls out to the Lord in distress. You could also say Draupadi calls out to the Lord in distress. But in the beginning, Draupadi thinks she can help herself. She's strong enough. And when she realizes she's no match for Dushasan, she then looks towards her husbands. Hey, at least they will protect me. And when they hang their heads in shame, she calls out to Dronacharya and Bhishma. They are not moved. Only then she calls out to Krishna. And then Krishna comes. Later on, Draupadi asks Krishna, why didn't you come right away? Krishna says, you didn't want me right away. You were thinking about everybody else helping me. Had you thought of me first, I would have been there, right? This is the mood of what the Lord wants. The Lord wants you to be completely dependent on him and nobody else. So he was telling Draupadi, you were trying to depend on yourself. You were trying to depend on others. And only when that failed, you came to me. Until then, you thought you were strong enough and others were capable of protecting you. So it's like the Lord was saying, only I can protect you. So anytime you need help, you come to me. Therefore, the Lord is emphasizing, even though these 4 people may come because of distress or may come because they want this, that, and the other, at least the Lord is saying, you are pious, you've come to me. So he doesn't reject you. Artha, then Artharthi, those who want prosperity. An example of those who want prosperity actually is Dhruv Maharaj. The first example of distress is actually Gajendra, the elephant that gets trapped in a crocodile's mouth. Out of distress, he calls out to the Lord, and Lord Vishnu appears right away and extricates him and rescues him. So Dhruv Maharaj was actually looking for wealth, right? He wanted power, he wanted position, he wanted things much better than his father and grandfather and great-grandfather. So you can think of Draupadi and Gajendra calling out to the Lord in distress. Dhruv Maharaj, who wanted prosperity, wealth. An example of a jnani is these Naimisharanya sages who are gathered to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam from Shaunaka Rishi. They happen to see him there and they know that he has heard the Srimad Bhagavatam when Shukadev Goswami was speaking it to Parikshit Maharaj. Therefore, out of curiosity, they ask him, what did you hear? Can you share with us? Of course, they are also concerned about the fact that Kali Yuga has started and they wanted to know what is going to be the condition of the Jivatmas in Kali Yuga. Is there any hope for them? So these were the rishis who, out of curiosity, were asking all these questions. Jignasu. And then the actual seeker of knowledge, the jnani, is like the 4 Sanat Kumaras, the 4 children of Lord Brahma. So I remember one statement made by His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, who's a wonderful preacher in ISKCON. He reminds us that when we encounter problems, We shouldn't go and tell Krishna how big our problem is. We should tell our problem how big Krishna is. Your problem is insignificant in the eyes of Krishna. It's nothing. But because we see our problem as being insurmountable and very difficult to overcome, we run to Krishna and tell him, see how much difficulty I am in. Rather, you tell your problem how significant Krishna is and how insignificant your problem is in the eyes of a bhakta. This is how a bhakta thinks. And then Krishna talks about demigod worship and why demigod worship is undertaken by those who are not very intelligent. It's because they want quick results. The demigods also have Paramatma within them. So how can they be the Supreme Lord? So the Paramatma is present in each of the 33 crore demigods. So we said that worshipping the demigods, it's like going to a shop, you pay a price and you get whatever product you want. But the demigods do not offer after-sale service. No guarantee, no warranty. You can't go back to them and complain saying your boon that I asked for and you gave me, it's not working anymore. The best example is Hiranyakashipu. He asked for all kinds of things to protect himself, to think that he can achieve immortality. And Brahma was telling him, boss, I myself have to give up my life. And you are asking me for immortality that I don't have myself. So he says tatastu to everything else that Hiranyakashipu asked for. But at the end, Hiranyakashipu gets vanquished. So be careful what you ask the demigods for. It may lead to self-destruction. So Hiranyakashipu thought he was very clever. Ultimately, he got destroyed by the Supreme Lord. So when something goes wrong with the boon, you can't go complain. No customer service. There is a saying in Latin, caveat emptor, I believe, which means buyer beware. So you are the one who's buying things from the demigods. So you should be careful. What is it that you're actually purchasing or trying to purchase? So the demigods will give you whatever you want. Krishna will give you what you need. So even if you may approach Krishna and ask him for things, he may not give it to you because he has the best interest in heart. So let us say a child is throwing a temper tantrum and they absolutely want something. You don't want them to have it, but the child is creating such a scene and such a fuss. You just give up and give them what they want. This is Krishna. When he allows you to go and get something what you want, he allows you to get it through the demigods. So when you throw a temper tantrum and you say, I want, he says, okay, I will not give it to you. Demigods will give it to you. Krishna will only give you what is best for you. Krishna will do everything he can once you have approached him to pull you closer to him, so that eventually you forget your little material desires or whatever, your insignificant complaints. So this is the position. Vallabhacharya was a great devotee of Lord Shiva. Do you know that? Before he became a devotee, great devotee of Lord Vishnu. So he was such a great devotee of Lord Shiva that Lord Shiva appears before him and asks him, what do you want? And Sripad Vallabhacharya says, I want what is most precious to you. Lord Shiva is taken aback. Very unusual request. He's not asking for anything material. He's asking me for whatever is precious to me. At that time, Lord Shiva says, Lord Krishna is the most precious to me. And Vallabhacharya says, then that's what I want. So Lord Shiva blesses Vallabhacharya with Krishna Prema. And then Vallabhacharya becomes a great devotee of Lord Krishna. Chandidas is another personality. So Chandidas was a great bhakta of Devi. He's composed a lot of wonderful prayers on Devi as well as Lord Krishna. How he becomes a devotee of Lord Krishna. So he was a great worshipper of Devi. And every day he would offer her flowers and pray to her. One day, for whatever reason, he could not get the flowers. So he asks his brother to pluck the flowers from the garden so that he can offer it to Devi. So his brother comes and gives him the flowers. And this time when Chandidas offers those flowers to Devi, Devi comes out of the deity and stands in front of him to eagerly accept the flowers. And Chandidas was taken aback. He asks Devi, I've been offering you flowers every day for so many years. Why did you come out now? To which Devi tells him, this is Krishna Prasad that you're giving me. Nobody gives me Krishna Prasad. So when I'm getting Krishna Prasad, I am ready to accept it. So Chandidas was puzzled. He says, what do you mean by Krishna Prasad? At that time, Devi tells him, your brother, he's a great devotee of Lord Krishna. When he was plucking the flowers, he mentally offered the flowers to Lord Krishna already. So when you offered the flowers to me, this is actually the remnants of what was offered to Krishna, and therefore it is prasad for me. And that's why I came out to accept it. Because nobody gives me prasad. Hearing this, Chandidas converts to becoming a great devotee of Lord Krishna. So there are examples of great devotees of Lord Krishna who were earlier worshipping demigods. For us, especially in our culture, it's very difficult to accept not worshipping demigods because this worship has been there in the family, or we've been told that if you worship this demigod, you'll get that. And so many different demigods have so many different things to offer. And therefore, demigod worship is not easy for us to give up in our culture. But Krishna is saying, you are foolish to worship the demigods because ultimately I am the one who is sanctioning all desires. And in this context, the shloka, one of the last shloka, where the three words come up, which is Adi Yajna, Adi Daiva, and Adi Purusha. So let us see. So where the Lord says that he is the supreme enjoyer, he is the supreme controller of everything, he is Adi Daiva, he is Adi Yajna, he accepts everything that is offered by anybody, even if it is offered to the demigods. And he is Adi Bhuta, he is the owner of everything. So Adi Bhuta, Adi Daiva, and Adi Yajna. So let's look at the last two shlokas before we begin chapter 8. So Krishna says in 29, intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. Actually, this particular shloka is not a pure, it's a mixed bhakti. This, so Krishna is introducing a new category of a pious person. He's talked about 4 kinds of pious people. Here is one more category. This kind of person is called a Yoga Mishra Bhakta. What are they endeavoring for? Liberation. But they are praying for liberation while they are performing bhakti to Lord Sri Krishna. We discussed yesterday the analogy that Amoglila Prabhu used, which is if there is a sale advertised for a plasma TV and the advertisement says you'll get a free DVD. So similarly, when you purchase Krishna, liberation is part of the offer. It comes with that purchase. You don't have to purchase liberation separately. But there are bhaktas who worship Lord Krishna so that they can get mukti, liberation. Such a person is called a Yoga Mishra Bhakta. They don't fall into those 4 categories that Krishna talked about. But what is important to note is this Yoga Mishra Bhaktas, they don't have material desires. They understand that Krishna is the Supreme Lord. But that desire is they want liberation. And therefore they worship Krishna. But they are not pure devotees. So in the last shloka is where you will see Adi Bhuta, Adi Daiva, and Adi Yajna. So you can see this. Shadadi Bhuti, Shadadi Bhutadi Daivam Mam, Shadi Yajnam Chaye Viduhu, Prayana Kale Pichamam, Devaduryukta Chetasaha. So this is where Krishna introduces the topic of death, which is the connection to chapter 8. What is Krishna saying? Those in full consciousness of me, who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation. This is Adi Bhuta. He owns everything, he creates everything. He is the governing principle of the demigods, Adi Daiva. He is the governing principle of all methods of sacrifice, Adi Yajna. So these 3 terms, Adi Bhuta, Adi Daiva, and Adi Yajna, is coming in this last shloka. Can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. So Krishna is saying, at the time of death, you should remember that I am Adi Bhuta, I am Adi Daiva, and I am Adi Yajna. Essentially a different way of remembering Krishna. So this sets the stage for chapter 8 today. So chapter 8 is titled, I don't have the slide up. So chapter 8 is titled Akshara Brahma Yoga. The single word summary for chapter 7 was boss. The single word summary for chapter 8 is insurance. This is spiritual insurance. We said that Arjuna has to decide whether he wants to accept the job offer that Krishna has made. So he's going to evaluate all the other benefits that Krishna is offering before he decides that the package is good enough for him to surrender to Krishna. So this is Akshara Brahma Yoga. Let's offer our humble obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So interestingly, the acronym for today is DEAD, doubts. So chapter 8 begins with Arjuna asking some questions. What is our final exam? Our final exam is death. All of us have to face it. There's no exception. How do we attain the supreme? And what is devotion in Krishna's eyes? Who's a devotee in Krishna's eyes? So chapter 8 begins with Arjuna asking 8 questions. We'll see what those 8 questions are. So Arjuna's asking, "O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. Who is the Lord of sacrifice? And how does he live in the body, O Madhusudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death?" Krishna has introduced the topic of death in the last shloka of chapter 7. Krishna has talked about Adi Bhuta, Adi Daiva, Adi Yajna. So Arjuna is asking, what is this Adi Bhuta? Who is this Adi Yajna? What is this Adi Daiva? And then a few more questions. Who am I again? What is karma? What is Brahman? What is this material manifestation? So these are the 8 questions that Arjuna has asked. What is Brahman? What is Adhyatma? What is karma? What is Adi Bhuta? What is Adi Daiva? Who is Adi Yajna? Where, whoever he is, does he preside? How can those engaged in devotional service know Krishna at the time of death? So Arjuna is asking, how can we actually remember you at the time of death? Is there a particular formula? Is there a trick? How can we easily remember you at the time of death? So Krishna responds to Arjuna's questions. So the 7 questions Krishna answers in rapid fire. And the 8th question is the rest of the 8th chapter, focusing on death. So Krishna says Brahman is this indestructible living entity. In other words, it is Atma, the spirit soul. Adhyatma is the living entity's nature, which is to serve. So Srila Prabhupada said, even if you're single, some of us may serve by adopting a pet or whatever it is. So our innate nature is to serve. That comes naturally to us. So Krishna is answering Arjuna by saying Adhyatma means the Jivatma always is keen to serve somebody or someone. I was listening to, I don't remember whose lecture, I think last week, one of the devotees' lectures I was listening to. And apparently he came across a person who told him very proudly, I don't believe in idol worship. And this devotee just kept quiet. But then later on, that person, for some reason, had invited him to his house. And when he went into the room of this person, he saw Amitabh Bachchan's photo all over the wall. And he very politely asked him, I thought you don't believe in idol worship. Aren't you worshipping somebody here? So sometimes we're really foolish. We make some grandiose statements that I don't believe in this and I don't believe in that. Actually, we are really foolish. So this person who didn't believe in God, an atheist, was happy to worship Amitabh Bachchan with his poster all over his room. So certainly he was looking up to somebody, just not God apparently. God was not part of the equation. Karma, the reactions that force the living entity to take a material body in this world. Karma plus what our desire is causes us to take a particular shape, a particular outfit. Adi Bhuta, the ever-changing material nature. It is created, maintained, and then destroyed. Adi Bhuta is Prakriti, which includes all the 33 crore demigods. Krishna answers Arjuna's 7 questions. So continuing with the next 3 questions. Adi Devata. Adi Devata is he who presides over all the demigods and their planets. Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, Krishna has said in chapter 5. So this is the universal form of the Lord that presides over all of the material cosmos. The sum total of everything that is material is residing within the universal form of the Lord. Adi Yajna, Krishna as the super soul, the Lord of all sacrifices. Who is accepting all the sacrifices? Again, going back to chapter 5. Bhoktaram Yajna Tapasam. Paramatma is accepting all the sacrifices. He is situated within everyone's heart. Who is this he? Arjuna asks. And where does he reside? When Arjuna asks, where does this he, this Paramatma reside? Krishna says, in everyone's heart. Ishvaraha Sarva Bhutanam. He resides within everybody. And then Krishna begins to talk about death, which is the main subject matter for chapter 8. Arjuna's question is, how can we think about Krishna at the time of death so that we can go back to him immediately? So this is the art of dying, the art of leaving one's body. So Krishna says, by the way, this shloka is the insurance policy. Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram yah prayati samadbhavam yati nastyatra samshayah. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, and whoever at the time of death or at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. And as if to emphasize that nobody should have any doubt about the statement of Krishna, Krishna is saying, of this, there is no doubt. This is your spiritual insurance policy if you work for Krishna. The insurance policy is, once you start working for Krishna, you'll fall in love with him so much, you'll remember him at the time of death. Krishna is saying, if you remember me at the time of death, I will take you back immediately. Don't have any doubt about this. But his criteria is, you should only be thinking about him. You cannot think about anybody else. Not your family, not your pet dog, not your wealth, not the EMI that you owe, that you've not paid. At the time of death, Krishna is saying, if you remember me, you've hit the bonanza. You're going back home. You're reuniting with Krishna. And Krishna is saying, of this, there is no doubt. So the shloka 8.5 is the spiritual insurance policy. So why is Krishna saying, if you do this at death, then you're good to go. You don't have to worry about birth again. So in order to prepare yourself for death, your entire life is actually a preparation for death. So death is like your final exam. It comes as a surprise test, unannounced. And because it's a surprise test and because you don't know when it's going to come, you should always be preparing yourself. You should always be practicing. You should always be studying. So you see how hearing becomes so important. This is why we try to have class every day. This is why we chant every day. This is why we also tell you, even if you don't have the beads in your hand, chant all the time, because you don't know when death is coming. Even by accident, if you're chanting, there are beneficial results to this. So when and how do we prepare ourselves? When is right now? Because it's an emergency. You don't know when you're going to die. So that's an emergency. So you have to start now. Krishna comes back to Abhyasa and Anusmaran by always practicing chanting the names of the Lord, by reading the Bhagavad Gita, by doing some service in the temple and for the Vaishnavas. Krishna says, you are always thinking about me. Anusmaran. So let's look at shlokas 8.7 and 8. Therefore, Arjuna, which comes, see, there are two shlokas where Krishna emphasizes leaving the body. So shloka 5, we said, is the insurance policy. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. And in the next shloka, Krishna says, he's giving you the opposite, huh? He's giving you a slight warning, but you have to read between the lines. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. Here, Krishna is saying, let us say you are thinking about your family, or you're thinking about your dog. If you're thinking about your dog, next life you will take a body of a dog. As simple as that. There's a pastime of Bharat Maharaj, a great devotee of the Lord. He gives up his kingdom at a very young age, institutes his very young son as the king, and he decides he will go into the forest and start meditating on Lord Krishna. And he does this meditation, but in the process, one day, he sees a deer, a pregnant deer, being chased by a tiger. And this deer tries to cross the river as the tiger is chasing it, and in the process loses its life, but gives birth to this young deer. Bharat Maharaj, who was up until then meditating, his meditation breaks. He rescues this baby deer and he becomes attached to the deer because he's taking care of it, he's feeding it, he's talking to it. So at the time of death, he was feeling great separation from the deer. He was wondering, who will take care of this deer if I'm gone? So in his next birth, he takes the body of a deer. And when he takes the body of the deer, by providence, he happens to be in the ashram of great sages. So as a deer, he is given the memory by Lord Krishna that he was indeed King Bharat in a previous life. So because he's in the ashram of the sages, in his next body, I think somebody asked this question, right? If you take a body of an animal, can you take a body of a human form in the very next life? That really depends. So here, because he was associating with pure souls, self-realized souls, the deer at the time of death comes back into a human body, and this time Bharat comes as Jada Bharat. And he takes a vow that he will no longer get distracted by anything outside. He will go deep within. And this time he is determined to achieve Krishna. And therefore, what happens is he runs around and walks around town, acting like he cannot speak. He's very unintelligent. He's unkempt, etc., etc. So everybody thinks he's a madman. He's lost it. But actually, Jada Bharat was a great soul. This was his deliberate, conscious act to be detached from the external world. So there is later on an interaction with him and a king. And in that process, he reveals himself to be a self-liberated soul. So we have to be careful what we think about at the time of death. Because Krishna is saying, without fail, you will achieve it. Just as much as he's giving you a guarantee that if you think about him, You will get him. He is giving you a guarantee that whatever else you think about, you will get it for sure. So if you're worried and you're very attached to your family at the time of death, you will have to come back and associate with your family members. It's just that you may have a different relationship next time. If you were the wife before, next time maybe you'll be the son, or maybe you'll be the husband, because we'll keep changing bodies. So whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. Without fail. This is why we have to practice thinking about Krishna all the time. It's a very risky proposition not to think about Krishna. Because if we think about anything else at the time of death, we are done. We are a failure. Then Krishna says, therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. So Krishna is saying, fight for me on my behalf. This is how you do your duty. So when you're fighting, think that you're doing this to please me. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. So again, Krishna is giving you reassurance, but he wants you to do something. He wants you to work and do whatever duties and responsibilities you have today in your life, but to do it by thinking about him, by offering everything that you do as a sacrifice to Krishna, by engaging your mind and intelligence in Krishna. In the next shloka, Krishna is saying, he who meditates on me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path. So Krishna is saying such a person is not going to take a vacation from thinking about Krishna, simply because they are tired of chanting, tired of listening. Such people are steadfast. O Partha is sure to reach me. Again, Krishna is giving you so many assurances. The insurance policy came in Shloka 5. But throughout this particular chapter, Krishna is going to tell you how you can come back to him. One should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is oldest, who is the controller, who's smaller than the smallest, who's the maintainer of everything, who's beyond all material conception, who's inconceivable, and who is always a person. Sometimes we have people who believe in the formless worship of the Lord. The Lord very emphatically states in the Bhagavad Gita that he has a form. He is luminous like the sun, and he is transcendental beyond this material nature. Krishna is describing himself here. He's the oldest, he's the controller, he's smaller than the smallest, he maintains everything. We can't think of who he is, but then we need to know he is a person. And now begins the section, depending on how you leave your body, you will get different destinations. So depending on the time of the day, the time of the year, your thoughts at the time of death, all of this decides what your next body is. It's actually a little scary when you read this. So many things can go wrong in this formula for us, trying to think of Krishna. So Krishna talks about how yogis leave their body, through this Brahmarandra that's at the top. Yogis can decide when they want to leave their body. By the way, that is not considered suicide. They have achieved a certain state where they can exit their body and take on another body. So Krishna is talking about the yogis who fix their life air between the eyebrows. Then there are those who are jnanis. What is Krishna saying? At the time of death, they have to utter Omkara, the Om sound. By reciting Om, they can enter into Brahman. They can merge. This is the Sayujya Mukti, merging with the effulgence of the Lord. But such a person has to practice celibacy. So even a Jnana Yogi has to be a renunciate. He has to practice celibacy. I shall now briefly explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. Yes. So this is yoga again. This is vibrating the sacred syllable Om. Krishna is saying they will achieve the spiritual planets. Keep in mind, Krishna has not said they'll come back to me, which means they're going to the spiritual planet where Krishna is not there. Narayana is there. For one who always remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain. How? Because of his constant engagement in devotional service. So this is why in ISKCON we emphasize the need to come to the temple to worship the Lord and to offer seva in the temple. So we said bhakti means it's an active process. Bhakti doesn't mean you sit alone in your house and do japa all the time. So please understand, in ISKCON, we are doing our best to simply institute the instructions that Lord Krishna is emphasizing into our daily routine. So it may not be possible for all of us to go to the temple every day to offer some seva, but definitely Sunday it should be feasible for us to go to the ISKCON and do whatever it is, help them with cooking, cleaning, serving prasadam, setting up the hall for Bhagavatam class, organizing the microphone system, making flower garlands, whatever it is, signing up people for Bhagavad Gita class, calling devotees, reminding them to come for class. All of this is acts of devotional service. And just by doing this act, you're automatically remembering Krishna, you're serving Krishna. So then Krishna gives a contrast between the spiritual world and the material world here again. So Krishna says from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery where repeated birth and death take place. So including the planet, the highest planetary system is called Satyaloka or Brahmaloka, where Lord Brahma resides. Even that planet gets destroyed. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. And then he gives the lifespan of Brahma in the next shloka. By human calculation, 1,000 ages. 1,000 ages means 1,000 Chaturyugas, which is 4.3 billion Earth years, is one 12-hour period of Lord Brahma. So another 4.3 billion Earth years is 12 hours of night. So totally our Brahma lives for 8.6 billion Earth years is his one day. Like this, if you consider Brahma lives for 100 years, his lifespan is 311 trillion 40 billion Earth years. That's how long Brahma lives, which we cannot even understand. So now you see how humility comes into the picture. We live for a few days, Brahma lives for eons and eons, but in Krishna's eyes, Brahma's lifespan is just 1 second. So that means our lifespan is probably millions and millions and millions of 1 second. is how long we are living in one life. So that's how insignificant we are. And Krishna talks about a little bit about creation. So he says at the beginning of Brahma's day, all living entities become manifest from the unmanifest state. And thereafter, when the night falls, they are merged into the unmanifest again. So when Brahma has to go to sleep, all the Jivatmas are resting. There's nobody who's alive when Brahma is asleep. And again, when Brahma's new day begins, all the Jivatmas come back in their various physical manifestations. Again, at the time of Brahma's night, again, Krishna says they are helplessly annihilated. And Krishna says this cycle continues. In the very next shloka, Krishna is going to talk about the spiritual world now. To contrast between the material world and the spiritual world, Krishna is saying, yet there is another unmanifest nature which is eternal. It is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and is never annihilated. When all in this material world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. So the spiritual planets never get disturbed. So it's only the prison that is being constructed, maintained, destroyed. Constructed, maintained, destroyed. So Krishna talks about one way to go back to him is through Ashtanga Yoga. Another way to go back to him is through Bhakti Yoga. And he has compared the material and spiritual worlds. How the material world goes through the process of creation, maintenance, and destruction, whereas the spiritual world remains intact. Krishna is also talking about the Sat Chakra Yoga, which is the same as the Dhyana Yoga, raising your life air to the Agnya Chakra. Another way is to chant Om, to practice celibacy, and fix the mind on Atman and Paramatman. Whereas Bhakti Yoga is far easier. You just have to chant, read, serve the Lord. Very easy things to do. Anybody can practice this. There's no need to undertake severe renunciation. We just have to regulate all of our habits, our senses, our mind, and our intelligence. And from whatever position we are in, we should perform bhakti. We are then directly engaged in the service of the Lord. And this engagement will actually purify us. Bhakti versus other processes. Bhakti brings you peace. Bhakti also cannot be checked by anyone or anything. It can be performed by anybody. It doesn't matter. Anybody. Bhakti automatically liberates us. With bhakti, we can purchase Krishna. The price that we have to pay to get love for Krishna is greed. This is spiritual greed. When our desire to have Krishna is so intense, we can actually purchase him. What does a karmi want? Karmi wants to gratify his senses. What does a jnani want? Jnani wants moksha. He wants to become one with God, which is the Sayujya Mukti. What does the yogi want? The yogi wants to achieve mystic siddhis, powers that they have. So those who intensely practice certain type of yoga actually get powers, different powers. They can create, they can destroy. Yogis can create planets and destroy planets. That's how powerful they are. They get these ashtasiddhis. But what does a pure devotee want to do? We only want to please and satisfy Krishna. So in that shloka 15, Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam, Krishna is saying, I have constructed this jail to be a place of misery and to be impermanent. So why would we want to forcibly stay here? If Krishna is saying this world is miserable, Why are we trying to find happiness in this miserable place? Does that mean we should all be somber and dejected and walk around in great sorrow because this place is a place of misery? No. How do you overcome this misery? By simply practicing bhakti yoga. Because your mind is then no longer dwelling on, I want this, I want that, I want that. Dukkhalayam, ashashvatam. It is temporary. So you may ask, why is Krishna so cruel? And why has he created this jail? And why is he torturing us here? Why is he allowing us to suffer like this? Why is he witnessing our suffering and not doing anything about it? Well, there is a simple analogy. In every society, there are criminals. Criminals have to be dealt with separately in a different way. Because if you allow them to continue to exist in the rest of society, society will just continue to disintegrate. Similarly, this prison house that Krishna has created called Prakriti is by design meant to inflict punishment on us, because when we go through difficult times, it should make you think about, why are you going through difficult times? It is deliberately designed to help you remember Krishna. So on the surface of it, it may seem like a punishment, but in reality, it is the extreme mercy, causeless mercy of the Lord, that through this distress, you can think about him. And by thinking about him, you can purify yourself. You can reform yourself in this prison. So it is not that Krishna is a cruel God. What is the punishment for us? The real punishment is birth, death, old age, and disease. Suffering just comes along with it. And the jail keeper for us is Durga Devi. But what is the first thing that happens to a prisoner? When you're a criminal element and you get thrown in prison, your clothes, you have to give up your regular clothes. You are given a different outfit. Similarly, when you step out of the spiritual world and you are sent to the material world, you can take any one of these 84 lakh clothes. The wardrobe is so huge. This 84 lakhs is equivalent to the 84 different types of desires, 84 lakh different type of desires that we have. That's how many desires that a Jivatma can have. So according to your desires, you will take on one of these 8.4 million clothes, your choice. But this is such a prison, it does not have walls. You can exit anytime you want. What's keeping you here though? The three gunas. So even sattva gun will keep you in this material world. So that's why Krishna says you have to transcend even sattva gun and come to the Shuddha Sattva platform or Vishuddha Sattva platform, which you can only get to by practicing Bhakti Yoga. Krishna has described the spiritual world. It is eternal, it's infallible. The bliss is never ending in the spiritual world. One day, you know, when Prabhupada preaches in the West, some of his first set of disciples were actually drug addicts. At that time, the youth was experimenting with LSD. It's like a psychedelic drug. It makes you dream fantastical things when you take that drug. Please don't try it out. I don't know what LSD is. I only heard about it. So the youngsters at that time were protesting the Vietnam War because the youngsters were drafted into the army, and a lot of them were unnecessarily being killed way on the other side of the world in a small country called Vietnam. At that time, they were experimenting with this drug called LSD. So one day, one of the Prabhupada's disciples asked him, Prabhupada, what is the spiritual world like? And the Prabhupada said, unlimited, it's like you are unlimitedly on LSD. So Prabhupada was trying to relate to them as youngsters by telling them, you are taking LSD to experience something temporary here, to experience God-like symptoms. But if you go to the spiritual world, it's like you're always on LSD. You're always in blissful state. So when you go back to the spiritual world, all your desires are fulfilled. It's a very attractive place, but it's not a manifested place. It is transcendental. And that's our ultimate destination. The destination for all Jivatmas is to go back to the spiritual world. Once you go there, Krishna says you will not return. So different times of the day, different times of the year, what happens to you if you die? So you can read those shlokas from 23 to 26 to understand what Krishna is saying. Between Krishna Paksh, Shukla Paksh, Uttarayan, Dakshinayan, daytime, nighttime, noon, what's your destination? Please understand that if you're practicing Krishna consciousness, these rules don't apply to you. You can die at any time of the day, any time of the year. If you have developed pure love for the Lord, you will go back to Krishna. You don't need to worry about all of these constraints that Krishna is talking about for others who are not his devotees. So devotional service encompasses everything. So let's just quickly look at the shlokas and then we can conclude the class. So here in 23, Krishna says, O best of the Bharatas, I shall now explain to you the different times at which passing away from this world, the yogi does or does not come back. Come back means where? Come back to this material world. Those who know the Supreme Brahman attain that Supreme by passing away from the world during the influence of the fiery God, in the light, at an auspicious moment of the day, during the fortnight of the waxing moon, or during the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. You see how many different criteria Krishna is laying down? If you're not practicing Krishna consciousness, you have to meet all of this criteria to go back to the Supreme Lord, to get moksha. Which means you have to carefully select when you're going to die. How can we select when we are going to die? We don't know. We can't even remember what we did yesterday. How are we going to remember or think about death tomorrow? So all of this criteria has to be met for a non-devotee to achieve Krishna, to go back to the spiritual world. The mystic who passes away from this world during the smoke, the night, the fortnight of the waning moon, or the 6 months when the sun passes to the south, reaches the moon planet, but again comes back. Well, if you're not successful, this is what happens. You try your best, but you select the wrong time of the day, the wrong time of the year, the wrong time of the waxing or waning moon, and your destination is moon planet. You'll go there, enjoy yourself, and Krishna says you'll come back. According to Vedic opinion, there are 2 ways of passing from this world, one in light and one in darkness. When one passes in light, he does not come back. But when one passes in darkness, he returns. Although the devotees know these 2 paths, O Arjuna, they are never bewildered, therefore be always fixed in devotion. And in the very last shloka, Krishna says, a person who accepts the path of bhakti, devotional service, is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, performing sacrifices, undergoing austerities, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities. Simply by performing devotional service, he attains all these, and at the end, he reaches the supreme eternal abode. Krishna is saying you don't have to practice karma yoga, jnana yoga, and dhyana yoga separately. If you're practicing bhakti yoga, you get the results of practicing the other 3 yogas automatically without even doing it. That's how merciful the Lord is. So constantly in this middle 6 chapters, Krishna is going to encourage you to practice Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti Yoga is all encompassing. So if you're practicing Bhakti Yoga, you get the results of practicing Jnana Yoga and Dhyana Yoga automatically. You don't have to do it separately. So we'll stop here for the day. Mancha kalpadarupyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrindi ki jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.